Conflict continuing in Ukraine as Russia's invasion of that country continues. We've seen huge concerns about the price of certain foods. Those fears are the price is already increasing. Before the war, Russia and Ukraine together exported large amounts of wheat. Now, as a continent which imports a huge amount of food, we may well see that our food prices are going up even higher. Dr. Richard Monang is an environment, climate action and development policy expert. He's an author as well. Dr. Monang, good afternoon to you. I really appreciate the time. In Africa, we have a growing population, as you know. We also have we're in a way a continent of people who farm. Why do we still import so much food into our continent despite doing so much farming here?
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, for having me. And there are two aspects to this. The first is lack of value addition. As we're speaking today, the continent of Africa is actually losing up to 50% of what it produces. And this is costing the continent $48 billion each and every year. And out of this $48 billion that has been lost, part of it is grain food, which is costing $4 billion that can feed 1.6 billion citizens. So the fact that people produce and they're not able to add value to what they produce is actually resulting to the continent being poorer and having more people who go to bed hungry. The second aspect is trade. The continent of Africa only trades 20% among its member states. That is, intra-trade within the continent is quite very low. It means that 80% of the food importation is as a result of that lack of trade. And with the advent and the establishment of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, that's an opportunity, because I was speaking today, we are in a continent that have 150 billion market opportunity for value-added food. But the continent doesn't tap into it. Then this value of 150 billion is estimated to grow fourfold to about 400 billion in just 8 years from today. That's what we're talking 2030. And the entire agro business for the entire continent is $1 trillion. So the point is closing the gap in adding value and also ensuring that intra-trade happens within Africa will actually be able to close the gaps of what we are seeing, that the continent is depreciating foreign reserves and importing food that can actually be achieved with what is being lost within the continent.
We see that in Europe, for example, governments there for many years have subsidized farmers, and that means that they produce goods and are able to sell them for perhaps lower prices than other countries are able to produce them. International trade policy can be very complicated. Is that something we should look at doing? If our governments did the same thing, would we find that we ended up importing less food into Africa?
That's a very important point. What is needed more broadly are incentives that can be put in place to inspire especially young people in a continent. Because we're talking in a continent that is actually a young continent. Over 60% of the entire population of the continent is youthful. And most of these youth are getting into the labor market. Each and every year, 12 million of them are looking for jobs that do not exist. So putting incentives that can then be able to allow young people to develop tools and develop solutions that can help add value to what is being produced by farmers in the continent, will see not just the gap being closed for importation, but at the same time also help create job opportunities. We are seeing young people across the continent developing simple solar dryers that are being decentralized to mothers in communities, in villages, to add value to what they produce, to their vegetables, to their tomatoes. And as a result of that, they are reducing post-harvest losses, but the young people are also putting money in their pockets by developing those tools. So we need incentives, tax breaks for young people that are developing enterprises that help reduce post-harvest losses, tax breaks for those who are actually engaged in developing these tools, tax holidays, and also financial incentives for young people who may not have a track record of credit history to be able to access financing, especially when they show that they're producing or devising solutions that help reduce post-harvest losses.
There's also a very complicated conversation to have about what we grow. So, for example, in South Africa, many people will eat bread that requires wheat, etc. There's certain grains that we grow, quite large numbers in this country. Are we growing the right stuff? Should we be growing something else?
The reality is that we're under the changing climate, and Africa is heating up twice as fast as the rest of the world. And when you look at the ingredient in which bread is made out of is wheat. And what the projections are showing is that 36% of wheat will be reduced globally in the world. And what does this tell us? It means that we need to look for alternatives. And what are these alternatives? Africa have got cassava. Cassava is a climate-resilient crop. And environmentally speaking and scientifically speaking, cassava withstand heat. It's a heat-stress crop. It's also an insurance crop as compared to other crops like sorghum or millet or wheat. And as a result of this, because it is a climate resilient crop, it can then be able to replace wheat. And we are seeing examples across the continent where in Nigeria, for example, they develop a policy called cassava bread policy, where 20% of cassava has to be put into any bread that is being produced. And as a result of this, it stimulated opportunities to reduce wheat importation and at the same time also ensure that at least a crop that is climate resilient is going to strive under the changing climate can actually be leveraged. And more importantly, cassava can produce up to 300 different variety of products: cassava bread, cassava flour, cassava beer, cassava. The leaves are nutritious and can be used by communities and families, and even used as animal feed. So ignoring this crop, and I use the word ignoring guardedly from the perspective that it's not being utilized in a continent where we have 500 million people who actually eat cassava, then we're missing an opportunity that can actually help to reduce these shocks that we're seeing happening already.
It can be quite difficult to say to people you need to change what you eat, and the countries we're dealing with are, generally speaking, democracies. There'll be resistance to that. You would actually have to do that quite carefully over time, wouldn't you? You don't tell people to stop eating bread. You change what's in the bread, and you do it over 10 years.
Absolutely, very important question. And I think the point is that cassava is an allergen-free crop. And as a result of that, the benefits of cassava to the community and to the human body needs to be communicated. And I think there is an urgency at a moment to be able to articulate the aspects that actually cassava bring. And I think because of the fact that it's not been articulated, and also because of the fact that it's not actually been leveraged through the policy space, like I gave the example of cassava bread policy, it's been ignored. And because of the opportunities that cassava has got, an allergen-free crop that is there not utilized, at the same time, also a crop that have 23.5 billion market across the entire world, and Africa is the biggest producer. Tapping into that will create jobs, will create opportunities, and will actually reduce the depreciation of foreign reserves that are actually used each and every year, over $35 billion to import food that could actually be leveraged with what is happening here. So it needs time, it needs sensitization, and also need policy incentives to spur the opportunity to add value to it, because most of the cassava in the continent, value is not added. People want to see cassava flour, but it doesn't really reach there because it gets spoiled along the way because value is not added to it.
Well, Dr. Munang, I mean, we talk about, and I agree with you, it does take time to change what people eat, to change what kind of food is produced. Maybe this is going to be the perfect shock. I mean, if international wheat prices have doubled over the last 2 weeks, maybe now is the moment to get governments to look ahead over the next 5, 10 years. Let me put the question another way. If we don't change policies in our continent, what's going to happen? Food's going to get more expensive, and that will have very severe consequences.
Absolutely. As I started off, I indicated that Africa is importing food worth $35 billion. Africa is losing food worth $48 billion. When you combine that, you're talking over $83 billion. Now, we're seeing shocks across the globe. It's not just wars. We're also seeing climate change that is impacting the entire world. We are seeing emergencies like COVID-19. So the point is, the continent needs to look for what can actually be able to address the challenges it faces and how it can then be able to reduce the depreciation of foreign reserves in importing food especially, and therefore leveraging on already what is within and the crops that have proven to withstand stressors like the changing climate and also have the opportunity to spur more opportunities become the norm. And what is needed is tapping into people's abilities, especially the young people, retooling their skills so that they can actually be tailored towards devising these solutions, and then restructuring the educational curriculum and integrating vocational courses that actually focus on devising solutions to these aspects of adding value and reducing post-harvest losses. This needs policy to incentivize uptake of solutions and at the same time also ensure that the enabling environment for this to happen is actually there.
Dr. Richard Munang, thank you. Environment, Climate Action, Development Policy Expert, author of a book on the subject already.